So what did you want to be growing up?
Initially, I wanted to be a truck driver.
Rodney Hamilton, welcome to Ped Chat. Let's talk about what you're doing today, which is a company called Greenlight.md, and
Right.
You are bringing behavioral screening into the primary care office.
That's
and,
right.
Until we met for lunch a few weeks ago, I didn't know that behavioral screening was a void in care. And interestingly, since we met a few weeks ago, I've found a company called Chattis and a company called Baby Noggin, and they're trying to bring it into the pediatric space. It's widely a care void, though, and from pediatrics on up to adult medicine. How are you filling that care void, or how are you helping physicians fill that care void?
Yeah, so I would say in general, pediatrics probably does a better job than adult medicine in general, because pediatrics has always sort of conceptualized the approach of a medical home, whether it was, in fact, the patient-centered medical home movement was started in pediatrics. And so from a pediatric training perspective, you always think of yourself, well, you are the primary care provider for that, child, and you would remain so. And so pediatric care is probably a little less fragmented as a whole. So pediatrics in general has always done a better job, with screening. But if you think about the adult world, less than 5% actually do behavioral health screening. And even pediatrics, a lot of the screening that's done is more developmentally oriented screening, and it's behavioral, like developmental type things, as opposed to screening for depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, things of that nature, which is where Greenlight is predominantly focused. And so we do serve a little bit of the pediatric market and more overlap on the adolescent side than we would in the younger child space, but mainly we focus on the adult market. And less than about a decade ago, there was a study that came out from the CDC that estimated that less than 2% of adult primary care had organized screening programs in place in their office. A decade later, that had improved to a little less than 5%. So not very good, to be honest with you. And most of these tests that we have basically created in an electronic format have been available in a paper format for years, but it's another step, it's another process, it's another friction element, like I was talking about, inside of the office, and so they don't get done. But the opportunity is very large. I mean, there's a lot of practitioners who are not screening, and a lot of patients who are not being identified. There are about 1 in 5 patients at any given time that could be diagnosed with a behavioral health condition. And there's about 17 million adults who live with depression, for instance. And 1 in 5 people in their lifetime at some time would have diagnosable depression, which is a staggering number if you think about it. Not all at once, but 20% over the course of their life.
What is this? Are you putting these screens that have been readily available, just not used? Are you putting them on an iPad?
Yeah, they're available through a tablet. They can also be given through email, prior to a visit. But the vast majority of our practices are giving the assessments on a tablet while the patient is waiting for the physician. So either in the exam room or more often than not in the waiting room. And then the results are color-coded and all on one page, and at a glance basically tell you sort of where this patient stands on whatever condition you're screening for. And we screen for about 18 different things. The most common ones are depression, anxiety, alcoholism, substance abuse, those types of things.
Rodney, besides behavioral health, what is the one problem area that you wish you had time to solve? Like, what's that one thing that you're just like, man, that is terrible?
Well, I think of the things that cause the most craziness in healthcare is how healthcare is paid for in this country, by far. I mean, it's not something that I can, fix or any one person can fix, but there's so many things that create friction in the system because of how healthcare is paid for, that a more rational payment methodologies would improve physician burnout. It would reduce patient frustration, et cetera. And if you think about the economics, even of direct primary care, there's physicians who can see a fourth of the patients that they would normally see in practice for a relatively small membership fee, $50 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And direct primary care is not necessarily not taking insurance, but you basically have a foundational membership, fee, and then you use insurance for the things that you need the insurance for. If you go to a specialist, if you go to the hospital, you go to X-rays and things of that nature, and especially in pediatrics, vaccines and things of that nature. But if you think about $50 a month, and let's say you have a patient panel of 600, which would be about a third to a fourth of what a pediatrician or even adult primary care doctor would have. That's $30,000 a month. That's $360,000 a year as a baseline. That is frictionless. Charge on your credit card. How much is your cable bill?
A lot more than that.
A lot more than that. How much is your phone bill? A lot more than that,
yeah.
Usually, right? So $50 a month, and you have a foundational funding of the basics of a practice that then above that you can go and bill insurance, and it's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money, and the amount of waste and the amount of effort and time that it takes to get paid, you're just the system is burning so much money doing that. Where if you took some of that money and actually put that into simpler approaches, you could have much better care. Now, the alternative to that, in not having direct primary care, is having capitated models, where you're being paid for a panel of patients on a per member per month basis that achieves a similar type of an approach. The problem is when you have multiple payers and you have different requirements of all of the different payers, and you're not in control of that, that makes it difficult to be successful in that kind of model, because you're adding complexity on top of a complex system, and most practices aren't.
As a patient in this $50 subscription model, what do I get?
Well, I think you could get a lot of things. You could get basic text messaging and portal type access to your primary care team, which I think is another concept that I think the system as a whole needs to be moving towards. Doctors are taught not in a team-oriented approach, and part of that is not that doctors don't want to be a part of a team, but doctors are the ones who are morally, legally, and ethically obligated to the patient, and is almost always by default the leader of the team in many cases, whether they should be or not, because they end up having legal responsibility. So that's sort of an aside issue. But I think overall, you need to think about team-based care with someone who's sort of the primary coordinator. And most people, to a large degree, don't expect to see their primary care doctor anymore for everything that happens. Maybe you see them for wellness care, because that can be scheduled. But if you have sniffles on a Friday afternoon, you're going to see whoever's in the office.
Yeah.
Those types of things. And increasingly, for pediatrics, the danger there is they're going to go to the urgent care center, or they're going to go to the retail clinic inside of Walgreens or CVS, and they're going to skip your office 100%. And so, pediatric practices are finding that those more convenient places of care are skimming off the lower acuity, the things that you could do in 5 or 6 minutes, and offset the visits that took you a lot longer. But you don't necessarily get paid for your time. You get paid for complexity. But if the only thing you're left with are those patients who are more complex or take more time, that puts pressure on the survival of the practice.
What is your biggest failure in life?
When I was in residency in that first year, and this was, I would say, a failure of not understanding who you are, is when you're in school, when you're an undergrad and you're in medical school, you're doing something different all of the time. I mean, every month or two, you're constantly changing what you're doing. You have a different rotation, you have a different course, there's constantly people or whatever. But when you start practice or you start in an environment, and we had a residency clinic, of course, you realize how repetitious medicine is. That you are doing a lot of the same thing over and over and over and over again. The people change, but the medicine aspect of it doesn't really change a whole lot. And if you're the type of person who kind of wants to do something and then move on from that, and then learn something new and then move on from that, repeating the same thing over and over and over again is not something that's going to appeal to you long term. Now, so that's one thing. So one failure I made very, very early on was not recognizing that I was the person who was not one who was going to like a lot of repetitive activities. And medicine is rife with repetitive activities. Mm-hmm. The second thing, and this is how I solve that problem, is the fact that if you put yourself in an environment that has a lot of repetitive activities and you have a lot of friction around those activities, so you have a lot of inefficiency, you have issues that you're dealing with. Is this going to be paid for? The availability of subspecialty services, the socio-demographic background of the patients. Are they going to actually pick up the medicine that you prescribe? So you add friction to a lot of repetitive activities, and that becomes something that you're definitely not going to be interested in. However, people still need to see doctors, and they still need to be seen, and they still need to be treated. And so that, of course, needs to be there. So I just really sort of changed the focus of where I was going to spend my time, from being the one who was going to do the repetitive activities to being the one to help reduce the friction of those who were going to do those repetitive activities. And when you look at it that way, well, computerization, the use of technology, is one way to do that, is to streamline workflows, to improve how you document, improve how you communicate, those types of things. Decision support, instead of looking things up in a book, to have knowledge brought to you at the point of care, because the computer now is sitting beside you helping you take care of the patients. And so that really is what sparked the interest in sort of medical informatics in the beginning, is really that shift in focus from me being the one to deliver the individual care to being one to help design the systems around the delivery of that individual care.
That's fascinating. Yeah, becoming the innovator instead of the practitioner, essentially. But you're innovating for
the practitioner.
Yeah, for the practitioner.
Yeah. I just realized that wasn't for me. Yeah. I wasn't going to be the one that was going to be happy being the practitioner. I always tell people I love the field of pediatrics, and I very much do. But I didn't really like the practice of pediatrics a lot. And I wanted to help not just the practice of pediatrics, but also beyond that. And that's what I decided to spend my time and leverage my medical background with.
So what is your biggest success in life then?
I would say probably making that transition, because I was good at that. I was good at being able to look at problems systematically and think of how to create rational solutions. I mean, because for instance, if you spend a lot of time in information sciences, you can't reason over something if the data doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So you can, some people who aren't as well versed in that, and who doesn't have as much of a technical background in terms of actually developing systems before, they sort of gloss over some of those factors that, well, why don't you do X? Well, the reason why you don't do X is because you don't have the data there to actually process. Somebody's got to put that data in there, and it's got to be of a certain quality, those types of things. So I was good at that, and being able to leverage that skill into a variety of jobs over the years, that I think is I'm probably the most proud of. I'm a lot more business focused now than I am in terms of the actual domain area of healthcare. I spend, what I learn about and what I read about today is vastly different than what I did, 20 years ago. Yeah. Keeping up with the policy environment, the regulatory environment, and the payer environment, et cetera. honestly takes up the vast majority of my time, because if you don't understand the overall environment of which you're working in, you can't either lead a company or develop solutions that are going to be meaningful unless you understand how all of those dimensions come together. So it's kind of gone from where in the early days I worked on very specific projects, for very specific areas, like inside of a clinic or inside of a hospital, or even inside of a company which had products that focused on a particular department, to now, much more entrepreneurial in types of thinking, like, well, what can we create?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of service offering can we create? What kind of product offering can we create? How do we communicate that? How do we market that? How we sell that? How we develop it? Does it matter?
Yeah.
Is it going to save the industry any money? Is it going to actually improve, care? I'm really not interested in anything that just sort of takes advantage of the current organization or chaos of the system. If it's some nuance of a payment, and I'm not interested in sort of leveraging or exploiting that. The types of things I'm interested in are things that, actually improve care. And in general, if you improve care, then ultimately you'll improve cost.
If there are pediatricians in the audience that want to become entrepreneurs, start their own thing, maybe they're looking at this process in their office and they can't find a solution. They're like, well, I should start a company that does this. What advice would you give them? What is a good first and second step if you want to start your own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so two answers to that. So one, if you don't have a lot of direct business background, you probably need to find a partner who does, who understands the whole sales, marketing, business development side. Most doctors are not good salespeople. Right. They don't know how to sell products. They don't know how to market products. Physicians have probably the innate perspective that if it solves a problem, I don't understand why other people aren't going to buy it. And it takes more than that. And I think if you think about, now the flip side of it is they should think of themselves as buyers and how much they don't pay attention to what people are trying to sell them. Well, right. Imagine yourself on the other side of that conversation. Think about that. So you need somebody who's probably been there and done that a little bit, and in healthcare, because healthcare is very much a different market to sell to. In lieu of that, if you just want to dip your toe in the business side of the house, on the product or services area, there are always startups and early stage companies who are looking for clinical advisors, either part-time chief medical officers or medical directors, and that would be another area. The Health Further organization here in town in Nashville is starting a specific track around that.
Interesting.
To connect startups with physicians who are interested in helping. And there are other organizations like the Physician Side Gigs, and I'm blanking on another one that's gotten started up. This is the issue of physician burnout in particular has been raised significantly in the consciousness of the healthcare industry, and certainly in the professional community quite a bit. So you're starting to see organizations and groups of people coming together to provide opportunities and more variety. But those are a couple things. So if you have an idea, find a good business partner to help vet that out and figure out whether it's a viable business or not. But the other is find somebody else to help. And that could be a very rewarding thing to do.
Awesome. Well, Rodney, this has been a pleasure. I thank you, and I'm sure the audience will thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join me in my office in Nashville, Tennessee. Right. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again for being on PeDChat.
Thank you.